I woke up to the sound of my neighbor's lawnmower. The clock read 7 in the morning. Mr. Devlin always mows his lawn on Saturday at 7 sharp, even if all of Newport was celebrating his daughter's wedding the day before. The man is like a Swiss watch. I like that kind of punctuality. It makes me feel like not everything in the world has gone crazy yet. My guest house sits in the far corner of my son Hubert's property. 1 bedroom, a tiny living room, and a bathroom. That's my entire kingdom. Hubert's friends used to stay here, coming for the weekend to enjoy the view of the bay. Now I live here, and guests are no longer welcome. There's a portrait of my Martha on the wall, 15 years since she's been gone. Sometimes I think she looks at me from the portrait and shakes her head as if to say, "Abbott, you old fool, what have you come to?" Martha would not have approved of my moving in with my son. She always said parents and adult children should live separately. Together, only on holidays and no debts, she liked to say. But when the doctor said my left leg would never be the same after that boatyard accident, and then the grandchildren enrolled in expensive private schools, everything changed. Selling our old house on Elm Street seemed like a sensible solution. Hubert said at the time, "Dad, why do you need that huge house? You're all alone, and boys need a good education. Come live with us. We have a guest house. You'll be comfortable there." It sounded like concern at the time. I got out of bed slowly, feeling the familiar ache in my knee. The mirror over the sink reflected all 76 years of my life: sparse gray hair, deep wrinkles, and faded blue eyes. Once I could lift the engine off the boat without help. Now it takes me 10 minutes to put on my socks. Stepping out of the cabin, I headed across the backyard toward the main house. My route is always the same. I never enter through the front door. It's an unspoken rule. My place is the back door, like the servants' quarters. In the kitchen, Enid was making breakfast for the boys. Orson, my oldest grandson, 16 years old, was staring at his cell phone. Pharaoh, who is 14, was doing the same. They didn't even look up when I walked in. "Good morning," I said, sitting down on the edge of the chair as if I was afraid of taking up too much space. "Mm-hmm," Orson mumbled, keeping his eyes on the screen. Pharaoh didn't even bother to mumble. Enid quickly placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of me. No sugar, no butter, half a banana. "For your health," she'd said the first day I moved in. I didn't argue, even though I'd eaten eggs and bacon all my life and was dying to taste them again. "Had Hubert left yet?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "He's out jogging," Enid said, not even turning toward me. "Then he has a meeting at the club. A meeting at the club. On Saturdays, Hubert plays golf with people who can help him advance his career. My son is a middle manager at Bristol Insurance, 15 years in one place, and still forward-looking, as he says. Martha called this approach wheel running, but she never said it in front of him. I ate my oatmeal in silence, watching my grandchildren. Once I had taught them to catch crabs in the bay, to make bark boats. Now they barely notice my presence. The last time Orson approached me directly was 3 weeks ago when he needed $20 for some game on his phone. "Grandpa, are you going to watch TV tonight?" Pharaoh suddenly asked, not taking his eyes off the phone. "Maybe," I answered, surprised by the sudden interest. "Why?" "We'll have friends over. We need a living room. Oh, that's it. The living room is the only place in the house where I am sometimes allowed to be in the evenings. The boys have their own rooms with TVs and computers. Hubert and Enid have a bedroom with a huge screen on the wall. And my little TV in the guest house only gets 3 channels because Hubert thinks a full cable package is overkill for me." "Sure," I said. "I'll find something to do." Enid finally turned to me, raising her eyebrows slightly. "Abbott, please don't forget to take your medication. I found your pills on the kitchen table yesterday." Her tone was as if I'd deliberately left my dirty socks in the middle of her perfect kitchen. "I apologize," I mumbled, even though I was sure I'd put the pills in my pocket yesterday. As I finished my tasteless tea, Hubert walked into the kitchen, glowing after his run. He looked trim and energetic in his 44 with a slight gray on his temples that made him look solid. My son had always taken care of his appearance. Proper nutrition, sports, expensive clothes, everything to give the impression of a successful man. "Dad," he nodded at me, pouring himself a protein shake. "How did you sleep?" "Fine, thanks," I lied. In fact, I hadn't slept well in years. "That's good. Enid, did you remember that the Prizes are coming over for dinner tonight?" "Of course not," she replied with mild irritation. "I've already ordered everything for dinner." Hubert turned to me. "Dad, why don't you have dinner at your place tonight? Richard Price is the new regional director and I wanted to go." "Perfect," I finished for him. "Sure, son. I won't get in the way." He nodded slightly, grateful for my understanding, but there was no shame in his eyes for putting his own father out from behind a desk for career prospects. I went back to my cabin and spent the day as usual, reading old boating magazines, poring over photos, trying to fix the wall clock Martha had given me for our 30th anniversary. Every now and then I looked out the window at my son's house, big, modern, with a perfect lawn and a terrace where they often have barbecues. I am never invited there. As a child, Hubert was different, a shy boy who would sit in my workshop for hours watching me fix engines. He'd ask a million questions and I'd patiently answer them. When he turned 12, we built a boat together, small but sturdy. Seawolf, he called it. We launched it in the bay and his face lit up with pride. What changed? When did my son turn into a man ashamed of his father? Maybe when he went to a college that Martha and I could barely afford. Or when he married Enid, the daughter of an economics professor who always looked at me, a shipyard mechanic, as a member of a lower caste. Or when Martha died and there was no one to remind him of family values. In the evening, I heated up some canned soup for myself. There were voices and laughter coming from the main house. I recognized Hubert's loud, commanding voice, the one he uses for important guests. Then there was the clinking of glasses, applause. Apparently my son had made another toast of success and ambition. I turned on my little TV, trying to drown out the sounds of merriment. There was an old John Wayne movie playing. Martha didn't like westerns, thought they were primitive, but I liked their simple moral. Good guys versus bad guys, justice always prevails. If only life were as predictable. An hour later, there was a knock on the door. Hubert stood on the threshold, swaying slightly. He smelled of expensive whiskey. "Dad, we were thinking, why don't you join us for dessert? Richard wants to meet you." I was surprised. I wasn't usually invited to events like this. "Sure," I said, quickly swapping my house slippers for boots. "I'd love to." When we entered the house, Enid, the Price couple, and another couple I didn't know were sitting at the table. Enid gave me a strained smile, but there was tension in her eyes. "Here's Daddy," Hubert announced, pointing at me with exaggerated pride. "Richard, this is my father, Abbott. Dad, this is Richard Price, the new regional director of Bristol Insurance." Richard Price, a large man with a ruddy face, shook my hand vigorously. "Pleased to meet you, sir. Hubert tells me you've worked in the shipyard all your life?" "Yes, 42 years," I replied, sitting down in the chair he offered me. "As a mechanic in the ship repair shop." "A real work bone," exclaimed Price with an enthusiasm that seemed to me to be feigned. "Men like that built America." I nodded, not knowing what to say to that statement. Enid placed a plate in front of me with what looked like an artistically decorated piece of cake. "So you're retired, enjoying a well-deserved vacation?" Mrs. Price, a full woman with bright red hair, obviously dyed, asked. "Yes, for 9 years now," I replied. "Dad's been living with us since he sold his house," Hubert put in. "We take care of him." Something in his tone made me tense. It sounded like I was a stray dog they'd taken in out of favor. "Actually, the money from the sale of the house went to a private school for Orson and Pharaoh," I said quietly. There was an awkward silence at the table. Hubert coughed. Yes, of course. Dad helped with the boys' education. Family values, you know? That's wonderful, Price exclaimed. A family should stick together. That's rare these days. The conversation moved on to other topics: golf, real estate, Price's latest yacht trip. I ate my dessert in silence, feeling like an exhibit in a museum, an old artifact pulled out of a closet for display to the guests. As the guests began to say goodbye, Price shook my hand again. It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thatcher. It's not every day you meet an old-school man. I nodded, wondering what exactly he meant by old school. That I'd worked with my hands all my life, or that I was old enough to remember a time without the internet. After the guests left, the atmosphere in the house changed dramatically. Enid, clearing the table, defiantly didn't look in my direction. Hubert poured himself another whiskey and stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite make out. Thanks for the invitation, I said, standing up. I'll go to my room. Sit down, Hubert said in a tone that brooked no objection. We need to talk. I sank back into the chair, feeling my muscles tense. That tone never boded well. What's wrong? I asked. Why did you say that? Hubert asked, twirling a glass of whiskey in his hands. About the money from the sale of the house. It's true, I replied. I was just clarifying a fact. You embarrassed me in front of my boss, his voice hardened. Made it look like I kicked you out of your house and took all the money. But isn't that what happened? I asked quietly. Hubert set the glass down sharply on the table. Damn it, Dad. You agreed to this. You offered to sell the house. After you said for 3 months that the boys needed private school but you couldn't afford it, I reminded him. Enid walked over and stood beside her husband with her arms crossed over her chest. Abbott, it's not fair. We gave you a place to live. We feed you. We take care of your health. And what do we get in return? You undermine Hubert's authority in front of his superiors. I looked at my sister-in-law, well-groomed, cool, with perfect hair and manicure. She had always treated me as a necessary evil that had to be put up with. I didn't mean to undermine anyone, I said. I was just telling the truth. Your truth could cost me a promotion, Hubert exclaimed. Price will think I've profited from my own father. Didn't you? Came out of my mouth before I could think. Hubert's face grew red. Is that so? After all we've done for you? You live in our house for free, eat our food, use our electricity and water. And you have the nerve to accuse me? It's not free, I countered, feeling the anger I'd been holding back for years boil over. I gave you $250,000 from the sale of the house, money I'd been saving all my life. And what? You think that's enough to last forever? Enid stepped in. Do you know how much it costs to support you? Your medications? Your trips to the doctor? My insurance covers my medication, I said, and I go to the doctor once every 6 months. That's not the point. Hubert pounded his fist on the table. It's about gratitude. We took you in when you couldn't live alone. And instead of thank you, we get this? He circled the room as if my presence had defiled it. I didn't ask to move in with you, I said quietly. You insisted after you took the money from the sale of the house. Enough, Hubert shouted, jumping up from his chair. Stop living off me. If it's so bad for you here, get a job and rent your own place. I looked at my son, not recognizing him. Where is the boy who was excitedly showing me his first fishing rod? Where was the teenager who cried on my shoulder when his first girlfriend dumped him? Before me stood a stranger to whom I was but a burden. I'm 76 years old, Hubert, I said calmly, though I was trembling inside. What kind of work can I get? I don't know. A security guard in a supermarket or a coach on a golf course. I don't care. He was furious. Just stop acting like I owe you something. At that moment, Orson and Pharaoh appeared in the kitchen doorway, attracted by the shouting. What's going on? Orson asked curiously. Nothing. Enid cut him off. Go to your room. But Hubert was too furious to stop. No, let them stay. Let them see their grandfather accusing us of not caring enough for him, after all we've done. The boys looked at me with bewilderment. I saw in their eyes a reflection of their father's anger. They had already internalized his attitude toward me. I'm not accusing anyone, I said, rising. I was just stating a fact in front of your boss. I'm sorry if it hurt your feelings. Hurt? Hubert laughed bitterly. You didn't hurt me, Dad. You disappointed me. I thought you understood what a family was. Turns out it's just a way for you to get free housing and food. His words hit me like a slap in the face. After all the years of hard work, after all the sacrifices Martha and I had made for him, after all the love I had given him, he thought I was a parasite. I'm leaving, I said, heading for the door. Good night. Yes, go, Hubert shouted after me. And think about what I said. Either you find a way to provide for yourself, or you're going to have to find another place to live. I left the house without turning around. The night air was cool, and I wished I'd brought a jacket. Slowly, leaning on my cane, I walked toward my guest house. Every step hurt my knee, but my heart ached even more. The cabin was cold and dark. I turned on the light and sat on the edge of my bed looking at Martha's portrait. You were right, old lady, I thought. You can't live with children. Never. I didn't know what I was going to do next, where to look for work at my age, how to rent a place on my pension, where to go. But one thing I knew for sure, I wouldn't take any more humiliation. I deserve better. And if my own son can't give me respect, I'll find it elsewhere. I pulled out an old, tattered notebook from under the bed. Inside were phone numbers of friends, many of which were probably no longer working. But there was one number I knew exactly by heart. The number of Garth Wade, my old friend and owner of a boat repair shop. Tomorrow I would call him. Tomorrow I would start looking for a way out of this situation. And today I'll just let myself grieve for the son I seem to have lost forever. It was a foggy morning. I lay in bed, staring at the gray light filtering through the curtains, and went over the conversation I'd had with Hubert yesterday. His words were still ringing in my ears. Stop living off me. Like I wasn't his father, but some beggar who'd accidentally shown up on his doorstep. I ran my hand over my face, feeling the wrinkles beneath my fingers, the marks of years, of toil and worry. What kind of account could I talk about when it was my own father? The clock showed 6:30 in the morning. I always woke up early, a habit developed over 42 years in the shipyard. My body remembered the rhythm of a working life, even if my mind had already resigned itself to retirement. I got up slowly, trying not to disturb my aching knee, and wandered to the bathroom. The cold water cleared my thoughts a little. Not a sound came from the main house. Hubert and Enid usually slept until 9 o'clock on Saturdays, and the boys even longer. I had time to think and decide what to do next. I dressed, trying to choose something decent from my meager closet. Dark blue pants that were starting to fray at the knees, but still looked decent. The plaid shirt Martha had given me the year before she died. An old but good sweater. I found Garth's phone number in a notebook I'd kept for over 30 years. Its pages were yellowed, many of the entries faded, and some of the names had been crossed out, their owners long gone. But Garth's number was still valid. I'd checked it last year when I'd called to congratulate him on his 70th birthday. I picked up my cell phone, an old model that Hubert had bought me 3 years ago, explaining that it would make it easier for him to keep me in touch. In fact, he just wanted to know where I was, and if I was in any trouble that might disrupt his routine. Garth answered after the third beep. His voice, hoarse from years of smoking, was the same as it had been 40 years ago when we'd worked together in the shipyard. Wade here. Garth, this is Abbott Thatcher. Abbott, the old sea wolf. There was genuine joy in his voice. What wins? Haven't heard from you since my birthday. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner, I said, feeling a prick of conscience. How are you holding up? Yes, as you can see, or rather, as you can hear, I'm squeaking, but I'm not giving up. I'm still keeping the workshop, though now I'm more of a consultant than a handyman. My back, is no longer the same. I understand. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. I have a knee. The one you hurt in the shipyard? Does it still bother you? Yes, it's getting worse as the years go by. We were silent for a while, as is often the case between old friends who don't need words to understand each other. Look, Garth, I said, finally making up my mind. I need to talk to you, in person. There's a problem. Garth didn't ask me over the phone. He just said, "Come to the shop. I'm here from 7 to 6 as usual. Same address, corner of Portside Street and Dockside Lane." "Thanks, mate. I'll be there by 11 if the bus doesn't let me down." "To hell with the bus," Garth snorted. "I'll pick you up. Where do you live now?" I was a little embarrassed to explain that I was living in my son's guest house, but Garth had never been the judgmental type. "Write down the address," I said, and dictated the street and Hubert's house number to him. "But don't drive right up to the house. Stop at the corner. I'll come out to you." "Trouble with your son?" Garth guessed. "Yeah, a little bit. I got it. I'll be on the corner at 10:30. Meet me in the old blue pickup." "Thanks, Garth. Really, thanks." "Oh, come on. How many times have you helped me out? I look forward to seeing you, man." I hung up, feeling strangely relieved. Just knowing there's someone out there who still remembers you and is willing to help is a big deal. At 10 in the morning, I quietly left the guest house and headed toward the exit of the property. The kitchen light was on in the main house. Enid must have been preparing a late breakfast. I tried to move as quietly as possible, not wanting to explain where I was going. Ever since I'd moved in with them, any time I left the house had raised questions, not because they were worried about me, but because they were afraid I'd do something inappropriate and embarrass them in front of the neighbors. I managed to slip out of the wicket unnoticed. The day was cool but clear. The fog had already cleared. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, leaning on my cane and enjoying a rare sense of freedom. Here, outside Hubert's house, I was myself again, not a burden, not an inconvenient relative to be tolerated out of mercy, but simply a man going about his business. At precisely 10:30, a shabby blue pickup truck appeared on the street corner. Behind the wheel was Garth, still broad-shouldered, though now slouching, with a mop of gray hair and the tanned, weathered face of a man who had worked outdoors all his life. "Abbott," he opened the passenger side door. "Get in." I struggled to climb into the cab, cursing my knee and the high step of the pickup. Garth waited patiently, offering no help. He knew I wouldn't accept it. When I finally settled into the seat, he shook my hand firmly. "Gosh, it's good to see you, old boy. How many years has it been?" "Almost 3 years since your anniversary," I replied, studying his face. Garth had aged as well as I had, but he still had the same fire in his eyes that he had when he was younger. "You look good." "A lie, but a nice one," he grinned, turning on the engine. "So, tell me, what's up?" On the way to the workshop, I told Garth everything. How I'd sold the house so my grandchildren could go to private school. How I'd moved into the guest house. How I'd gradually turned from a beloved father into a burden. And finally, about last night's scandal and Hubert's ultimatum. Garth listened in silence, only occasionally shaking his head or frowning. When I finished, he stared at the road for a while, then said, "You know, Abbott, my oldest, Noel, tried to do that to me too. After Sarah died, he started hinting that I'd better sell the house and move in with him. Said I was having a hard time on my own, that he'd feel better if I was looked after." "So what did you do?" "I told him to go to hell," Garth laughed, but without mirth. "Told him I'd die in my own house, just like I'd planned. And then he hinted that if he insisted, I'd rewrite my will for charity." "Did it work?" "It worked. Now his laughter was genuine. He's called every week since then, asking if I need anything, if I need the grass cut or the roof fixed. A will, my friend, is a powerful tool, especially if you have something to leave behind. I thought about it. I didn't have a house or significant savings, but I did have a pension and a small bank account, the leftovers from the sale of the house that Hubert couldn't get from me. It was funny money, in his opinion, but for someone who had worked with his hands all his life, it was a lot. "I'm not sure I have enough money to make this work," I said with a sigh. "Have you checked your account lately?" Garth asked, turning onto Port Side Street. "I mean, personally? Not through your son?" I wondered. To be honest, I hadn't kept track of my finances in a while. Hubert had volunteered to help me with the paperwork shortly after I'd moved in, and since then I'd just signed whatever documents he slipped me. "To be honest, no," I admitted. "Hubert said he'd take care of everything." Garth shook his head. Abbott, you've always been too trusting. Not that I'm accusing your son of anything, but check your account, and do it without him knowing." We pulled up to Garth's shop, a small red brick building with a wide gate and a sign that read Wade's Boat Shop above the entrance. Nearby was a dock where several boats of various sizes, from small fishing dinghies to medium-sized yachts, bobbed on the waves. Inside, the workshop smelled the same as it had 40 years ago: oil, wood, seawater, and metal. The smell was like a time machine for me. I immediately remembered my first days in the shipyard, when I was a young and energetic guy just back from the army. "Have a seat." Garth pointed to an old chair in the corner of the small office. "Do you want coffee?" "I only have instant, but it's strong." "I'd love some." I nodded, looking around the room. Garth's office was the opposite of the sterile cleanliness of Hubert's house. Everything was functional and a little messy. Stacks of papers on the desk, boat blueprints on the walls, old framed photos, tools hanging wherever they could be found. But there was a sense of life in the mess. Real life, not the glossy magazine picture that Enid had so carefully maintained. Garth set a mug of coffee in front of me and sat down across from me. "So, what are you going to do?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Looking for a job at 76. It's a long shot, you know." "Why don't you come work for me?" Garth suggested it. "Not full-time, of course, and not hard work. But you've always been the best mechanic in the shipyard. You could do some consulting, help with engine diagnostics. I can't pay you much, but it'll be enough to live on." I looked at him in surprise. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. I need someone who knows about old engines. The current mechanics only know how to do computer diagnostics. I've got people coming in with old boats, engines from before we were even born. Who but mastodons like us can fix them?" I felt a warm feeling inside. For the first time in a long time, someone needed my skills, my experience. Someone saw me not as a burden, but as a valuable employee. "Yeah, I don't know what to say, Garth. Just say yes, and be done with it," he clapped me on the shoulder. "Besides, it'll give you an excuse to move out on your son. I know a couple of cheap furnished rooms not far from here. Nothing fancy, but clean and quiet. With your pension and a small salary from me, you'll live quite well." I sipped my coffee, pondering his offer. On the one hand, it was a chance to regain my independence and self-respect. On the other, the thought of starting from scratch at my age was frightening. What about my knee? I won't be able to stand or walk for long. "You'll work sitting down," Garth said. "I'll set up a place for you next to my desk. You'll see clients, listen to their problems, make recommendations. Just experience and brains, no physical exertion." It sounded tempting. Very tempting. "Let me think about it," I asked. "This is a big decision." "Sure," Garth nodded. "But don't wait too long. I've already got the space in the workshop, but the rooms might be gone." We finished our coffee, and Garth offered to show me the workshop. I gladly agreed. I missed the smell of machine oil and the sound of tools at work. Garth's workshop was smaller than the shipyard where I'd worked most of my life, but it was well equipped. In the far corner, two young men in overalls were dismantling an old diesel engine. When they saw us, they nodded but didn't stop working. "My assistants," Garth explained. "The Morrison brothers, Theo and Pierce. Good guys, quick learners, but they lack experience with classic models." I got closer and immediately saw a problem with the engine, characteristic wear on the valves, which these young men probably hadn't even noticed. "Volvo Penta, 73-year model?" I asked, leaning over to get a better look. The guys looked at each other in surprise. "Exactly," said the older one. "How do you know?" "From the shape of the valve cover," I pointed to the part, "and the wear pattern. This model has always had a problem with the oil pump. Look at this." I spent the next hour explaining the features of the old engine to the young mechanics, feeling like I was back in my element. They listened attentively, asked questions, and I saw respect in their eyes, something I hadn't seen in my own son's eyes in years. When we were done, Garth took me aside. "See? You explain more to them in an hour than I did in a week. They're good mechanics, but no one compares to experience." I was glad to hear that, but something was still bothering me. "Garth, I appreciate the offer, I really do, but I don't want to be a burden to you too. I don't want you offering me a job out of pity." Garth looked at me seriously. "Abbott, you've known me for 40 years. Have you ever seen me do anything out of pity? I'm a businessman. If I'm offering you a job, it means I need you. I need your knowledge, your experience. And if it helps you get out from under your son's thumb, so much the better." I nodded, feeling tears come to my eyes. Damn old age, making me sentimental. "Thank you, friend." "Yeah, I'll think about it. I promise." "That's good." Garth clapped me on the shoulder. "Now let's go get some lunch. There's a good place nearby that serves great roast beef sandwiches." After lunch, Garth offered to show me the rooms he was talking about. We drove his pickup to the old part of town, where the streets were narrow and the houses were stone, dating back to the 19th century. "Right here." Garth stopped at a 3-story gray stone house. "Mrs. Flynn has rooms on the second floor. There's an elevator so you won't have to take the stairs." Mrs. Flynn was an energetic woman of about 65, with bright red, obviously dyed hair and a sharp look in her brown eyes. She led us down the corridor, telling us the rules. Smoking on the balcony only, guests could be admitted until 10 o'clock at night. Breakfast was included in the price, but lunch and dinner were extra. Laundry once a week, cleaning twice a week. The room was small but clean and cozy. Bed, dresser, desk, chair, TV on the wall. The window had a view of the harbor. "There's a shared bathroom for 2 people," Mrs. Flynn continued. "But the second room is empty now, so you'll use it alone for now." "How much is it?" I asked, calculating my options. She said it was quite reasonable, especially with breakfast included. "Think it over, Mr. Thatcher," she said. "The room will be available for another week, and then I can't promise." When we got outside, Garth asked, "What do you think?" "Not bad," I admitted. "Not bad at all. Take the job, move here, and start a new life," Garth said confidently, as if it were the easiest decision in the world. "Show your son that you don't need his favors." "And if I fail? If I fail at my job or my health fails?" Garth sighed. "Abbott, you've always been an overreacher. You've always been afraid to make a move without thinking things through. But sometimes you just have to jump in and swim." We got in the pickup and drove back to the shop. I was silent on the way, thinking about everything I'd seen and heard all day. "You know," Garth said, "there's something else you should think about." "What's that?" "Your will. You said you had a little savings. Who would get it if something happened to you?" "I've been thinking. I didn't have a will. It never occurred to me to make one. I guess the default position would be that Hubert would be the sole heir." My son, I suppose, I said. And that's after the way he treats you? Garth shook his head. Take my advice, Abbott. Go to a lawyer, make a will, and make sure your son understands that if he doesn't treat you with respect, he won't get a dime. That's kind of petty, don't you think? I asked uncertainly. Petty? Garth snorted. He makes you a burden, makes you live in the guest house, humiliates you in front of the whole family, and you're worried about petty. You're too kind, Abbott. Always have been. But sometimes kindness hurts. Sometimes people need to be taught a lesson. We pulled up to the shop and Garth turned off the engine. Look, I'm not saying you should disinherit him outright, but you can put conditions on it. You can leave the money directly to the grandchildren, bypassing the son. You can give some of it to charity. The main thing is to make it clear that your money is your money and you'll use it as you see fit. I looked out at the harbor where the boats were bobbing on the waves. Martha loved the water. We often went out into the harbor in the little boat I had built myself. She always said I was too soft on Hubert, that I was spoiling him. One day he'll think the whole world owes him, she warned. And as always, she was right. Do you know a lawyer who might be able to help? I asked, having made up my mind. Garth smiled. I know one, Torrin Elmsley. He's a great lawyer even though he's young. He helped me with my will, and he's not the type to gossip. If you'd like, I can arrange a meeting. Yes, please, I nodded. And, I accept your job offer. When can I start? Tomorrow, Garth held out his hand to me. Welcome to the team, Abbott. We shook hands, and I felt a long-forgotten feeling inside me, a sense of worth. I was needed again. I was part of something more than just a burden in my son's house. Now let's get you back before your son puts out an APB on you, Garth said, starting the truck. And remember, not a word about our plans. Let it be a surprise. All the way back, I thought about how my life had changed in one day. In the morning, I was a desperate old man who didn't know where to go. Now I had the prospect of a job, a place to live, and, perhaps most importantly, a way to fend for myself. The idea of a will seemed a little unworthy. Using money as leverage wasn't something my parents had taught me. But then again, hadn't Hubert done the same thing to me? Didn't he use my financial dependence to control me? Garth dropped me off on the street corner, just as he had that morning. Before I got out of the car, he shook my hand firmly. I'll contact Elmsley today, and I expect to see you at the workshop on Monday, 9 o'clock in the morning. Don't be late, you old sea wolf. I won't be late, I promised, feeling my lips stretch into a smile. Thank you, Garth, for everything. You're welcome, he winked at me. Friends are supposed to help each other, right? I watched his blue pickup disappear around the corner and thought about how long it had been since I'd felt this good. Torrin Elmsley turned out not to be as young as I'd expected, according to Garth. He was in his early 40s, but he looked younger with his smoothly shaven face and modern haircut. His office was in a small but elegant building near downtown Newport. Inside, it smelled of leather and wood polish, the odor of solidity and reliability. Mr. Thatcher, nice to meet you. Torrin shook my hand firmly. Garth has told me a lot about you. Nothing too embarrassing, I hope, I smiled, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. Only good things, the lawyer assured me. He said you were the best mechanic that ever worked in the Newport shipyard. I was pleased to hear that, though I suspected Garth had exaggerated my virtues. So, Torrin folded his hands on the table. I understand that you want to make a will. Did Garth mention that you have a difficult situation with your family? I sighed and began to tell my story. Again, just as I had told Garth's a few days ago, about how I'd sold the house to help my grandchildren with their education, how I'd moved in with my son, and how I'd gradually gone from father to burden in his eyes. Torrin listened attentively, sometimes making notes in his notebook but not interrupting. And the last straw was his ultimatum, I finished. Either I find a job and move out, or I couldn't bring myself to repeat my son's words. I understand, Torin nodded. It is a difficult situation, and I sympathize with you. Now tell me about your estate. What exactly do you want to include in your will? I pulled an envelope out of my jacket pocket. Here's my bank statement. It's about $35,000, the balance from the sale of the house after most of it went to my grandchildren's education. Torin took the envelope but did not open it. This is all your assets and the pension, insurance, other accounts or investments? I shook my head. The pension is small, typical for a man who has worked with his hands all his life. Insurance? Yes. There's a death policy, but I'm not sure how much it costs now. My son has been handling all of these matters for the past few years. Torin frowned. Mr. Thatcher, did you give your son power of attorney to manage your finances? Not officially, I replied. But he helped me with the paperwork, paid my bills, kept track of my savings. And you never checked your accounts yourself? I was embarrassed. No, I trusted him. Thorin tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. Before we make a will, I would recommend a full audit of your finances. We need to know exactly what you have. Do you think my son could... I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. I'm not suggesting anything, Torin said softly. But my professional experience says it's better to be safe, especially given your current relationship. I agreed, though the thought that Hubert might have abused my trust was painful. What should I do? I asked. First, let's check your main account. Torin opened the envelope and examined the statement. Is it a current account at the First National Bank of Newport? Yes, I nodded. I've kept money there for 40 years. Good, he made a notation. Do you have any other accounts? Maybe a savings account or an investment account, I wondered. There used to be a savings account that Martha and I opened to pay for Hubert's college, but I thought that money had been spent long ago. Let's check it out. Torin picked up the phone. With your permission, I'll call the bank right now. You'll need to answer a few questions to confirm your identity. I nodded and he dialed the number. After a short conversation with the operator, Torin handed me the phone. I answered the standard questions: date of birth, mother's maiden name, and the last 4 digits of my social security number. Thank you, Mr. Thatcher, the bank teller said. I can now provide your account information to your attorney as you requested. Torin picked up the phone and began taking notes. His eyebrows gradually rose higher and higher. When he finished speaking, he looked at me with surprise. Mr. Thatcher, you have not 1 but 3 accounts in this bank. In addition to a current account with $35,000, you have a savings account with about $120,000 and an investment portfolio worth about $200,000. I stared at him, not believing my ears. There must be some mistake. I've never had that kind of money. The bank claims these are your accounts, Torin said. The savings account was indeed open to pay for your son's education, but it seems that you continued to fund it even after your son graduated from college, and the investment portfolio was set up. He looked at his notes. 15 years ago. About the time your wife died? I suddenly remembered Martha's insurance. She insisted on life insurance shortly before she was diagnosed with cancer. I got the payout, but I was so devastated by her death, I don't even remember what I did with the money. You seem to have invested it very wisely, Torin remarked. That portfolio had more than doubled in 15 years. I sat stunned. Over $350,000. It was a huge sum for a man who had spent his life counting every dollar. And does my son know about these accounts? I asked quietly. Torin shook his head. The bank can't provide that information. But given that you yourself did not know about them, probably not. Or knows, but didn't tell you. I tried to make sense of this information. If Hubert didn't know about the money, then his attitude toward me was based on a sincere, albeit cruel belief that I was a financial burden. If he did know and was hiding it, that was far worse. "What else do we need to check?" I asked, still trying to come to my senses. "Your insurance policy, real estate, personal belongings that might be of value," Torin listed. "But first, let's deal with these accounts. I suggest that we transfer the management of the investment portfolio to you and perhaps change the access rights to your accounts." "Yes, of course," I agreed. "What do I need to do?" "We can go to the bank right now if you have time," Torin suggested. "I'll help you with all the formalities." 3 hours later, I walked out of the bank a completely different person, not only because I was now aware of my condition, but also because I was back in control of my life. I had changed my passwords, revoked all the powers of attorney that Hubert had somehow obtained to manage my accounts, and even got myself a new debit card that would go to Torin's office address. We returned to the attorney's office, and I was finally able to focus on the main purpose of the visit, making a will. "So," Torin spread out a blank sheet of paper in front of me. "How do you want your estate to be disposed of?" I took a deep breath. "I've thought about it a lot. Hubert and Enid shouldn't get a dime. They've already taken enough." "I understand," Torin nodded. "And your grandchildren, Orson and Pharaoh?" I wondered. "They're still young. Right now they only see me as an old man who's bothering their parents, but maybe someday they'll understand." "Do you want to leave them something?" "Yes, I've decided. But with conditions. I want them to get the money only after they graduate from college, and only if they visit the nursing home as volunteers every year, at least once a month starting when they're 16. Torin raised an eyebrow. "An unusual condition." "I want them to learn to respect their elders," I explained. "I want them to see that the elderly are not a burden, but people with history, with dignity. That's more important than money." "How much do you want to leave to each of them?" 50,000 each, I said after a moment's thought. "Not too much so that they can just live their lives, but enough to get them off to a good start." "Agreed." Torin made a note. "And the rest of your fortune?" I smiled. "There's an idea here that I've been hatching all the way from the bank. I want to set up a scholarship fund at the local community college for kids from working families who want a technical education. Mechanics, electricians, welders, people who work with their hands and build real things." Torin's eyes lit up. "A great idea, Mr. Thatcher. It will be a worthy legacy." "Call it the Abbott and Martha Thatcher Scholarship Fund," I added. "Martha always wanted more children to have the opportunity to study." "It will be done," Torin wrote down my wishes. "Anything else? Maybe some personal items you would like to pass on to someone?" I wondered. "My tools. I'd like them to go to Garth Wade or his workshop if he's gone. Martha's photographs and personal effects, for the grandkids when they're older and maybe interested in their roots." "What about your son? Are you sure you don't want to leave him at least something symbolic?" Torin asked cautiously. I shook my head. "No. If I leave him even $1, he'll find a way to contest the will, claiming I was incapacitated or influenced. I know my son well enough." "In that case, we need to make sure the will cannot be contested," Torin said seriously. "I suggest including a clause explaining your decision to exclude your son, and it might be helpful to have an independent medical examination to confirm your capacity." "I agree," I nodded. "Do whatever you think you need to do." "One more thing," Torin added. "You mentioned that you plan to move to Garth's workshop. That might cause a negative reaction from your son." "I'm prepared for that," I said firmly, "especially now that I know my financial situation. In that case, I suggest that you appoint Garth as executor of the will," Torin said. "If you trust him, of course." "Completely," I answered without hesitation. "We've known each other for 40 years, and he's never let me down." "Very well." Torin made another note. "I will prepare a draft of the will within a few days and contact you for final approval." When all the details were discussed, Torrin walked me to the door. "Mr. Thatcher, may I give you some personal advice?" "Of course," I nodded. "Be careful when you get home. Don't tell your son what you found out today, at least not until you're ready to move." I nodded, realizing he was right. If Hubert found out about my money or the will, he might change his behavior, not out of genuine remorse, but out of fear of losing his inheritance. "I will be careful," I promised. "And thank you for everything." "You're welcome," Thorin smiled. "It's an honor to help you." As I left the lawyer's office, I took a deep breath of fresh sea air. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I had a job, I had money, and I had a plan. I was no longer a helpless old man dependent on my son's favor. I decided not to go straight home, but to take a walk along the waterfront. The day was clear, with a light breeze from the bay. Yachts swayed on the waves, seagulls circled over the water, begging tourists for crumbs. I found a vacant bench and sat down, looking out over the water. Not too far from here was the shipyard where I had worked most of my life. I remembered going there as a young guy fresh out of the army with nothing but 2 strong arms and a desire to work. I remembered meeting Martha there, who was a secretary in the office. How we got married, bought a small house, had Hubert. How we saved every dime so our son could get an education and live a better life than we did. And here I sat all these years later, feeling like a stranger in my own son's life. Something had gone wrong, but I couldn't say exactly when or how it happened. Maybe Martha and I had spoiled him too much. Maybe we were doing too much for him, not letting him learn the value of labor and money. I pulled out of my pocket an old photograph I always carried with me. It showed Hubert, a 10-year-old boy, sitting with me in the boat we had built together. His smile was so genuine, his eyes shining with pride. Where had that boy gone? When did he turn into a man for whom status and money became more important than family? Perhaps my new will would really teach him a lesson, but I was under no illusions. Hubert would likely be furious, not remorseful, when he found out he'd been disinherited. He wouldn't realize it wasn't about money, it was about respect. It's about how he treated his father. I sighed and tucked the picture back into my pocket. The sun was starting to slip toward dusk, and it was time for me to head back. I didn't want Hubert to start asking questions about where I had been all day. On the way home, I bought a bottle of whiskey from a small store. Not cheap, but not too expensive either. So far, I wasn't ready to show that I had any money. But this evening I wanted to celebrate my newfound freedom, albeit alone in my little guest house. I waited until the lights went out in the main house and poured myself a glass of whiskey. Raising it to Martha's portrait, I said quietly, "To us, old girl, and to the future we can create even at our age." It seemed to me that Martha smiled from the picture. She always said it was never too late to start over, and she was right, as always. I took a sip of whiskey, feeling the warmth spill over my body. Tomorrow, I'll go to the bank and check my investment portfolio. The day after tomorrow, I'll look at the room Garth offered. And on Monday, I'll start my new job. At 65, I thought life was over. At 70, I was sure I had nothing left to live for. But at 76, I suddenly realized I could still decide my own fate. I could still say no to disrespect and yes to new opportunities. And it was a wonderful feeling. A feeling worth celebrating with another sip of good whiskey. It had been a week since I'd signed the will at Torrin Elmsley's office. All this time I'd been living a double life. By day I'd worked in Garth's workshop, relishing the opportunity to feel useful again. In the evenings, I'd go back to the guest house and pretend nothing had changed. Hubert had hardly spoken to me since our quarrel, which suited me just fine. Enid had been emphatically polite but cold. The boys, as usual, paid no attention to me. I was almost finished with my preparations for the move. The room Garth showed me was even better than I'd expected. Mrs. Flynn had agreed to rent it to me starting the following Monday. I surreptitiously packed most of my stuff, Not that there was much of it, and stashed the bags under the bed. All that was left was to gather the last little things and inform my family of my decision. Thursday morning, I had breakfast at the main house and headed to Garth's workshop. The day passed in pleasantries as I counseled the young mechanics on repairing an old Chrysler Crown engine. It was nice to see the respect in the young guy's eyes as I explained to them the finer points of carburetor adjustment. Upon returning home around 6 p.m., I immediately noticed something was wrong. Hubert's car was in the driveway, although he was usually still at work at that time. There were lights on in the living room windows, and I could see the silhouettes of several people gesticulating vigorously. I walked quietly through the garden to my cottage, hoping to avoid seeing my son, but no sooner had I opened the door than I heard his voice. "Daddy, there you are!" I turned around. Hubert was walking quickly across the lawn toward me, his face a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Where have you been? We've been trying to call you all day." "I turned my phone off," I answered calmly. "I was busy." "Busy?" Hubert frowned. "What could you have been busy with?" I shrugged. "All sorts of things. What's wrong? Why are you home so early?" Hubert hesitated, clearly unsure of how to start the conversation. "Dad, we need to talk. It's important." "About what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Not here." He looked away, as if he was afraid we'd be overheard. "Let's go inside." "I'm tired, Hubert," I said. "If it's not urgent, let's put it off until tomorrow." "It is urgent," he insisted. "Please, Papa, it's about your future, our future together." I sighed, realizing I couldn't avoid this conversation. "Okay, give me 5 minutes to get cleaned up and I'll be there." Hubert nodded with visible relief. "Sure. We'll be waiting for you in the living room." When he left, I went into the cabin and called Garth at once. "They know," I said without preamble. "About the money or about the will?" Garth asked. "I'm not sure. Not yet. But Hubert's home in the middle of the day, nervous, and wants to have a serious talk about our future together." "Hang in there, old man," Garth advised. "And don't be manipulated. Remember, now you know the truth about your financial situation. You're not dependent on them." "I remember," I assured him. "I'll call you later and let you know how it turned out." After washing my face and changing my shirt, I headed toward the main house. The family was waiting for me in the living room. Hubert was pacing nervously from corner to corner. Enid was sitting on the couch with a tense expression, and the boys were in their chairs, watching curiously. "Have a seat, Dad." Hubert pointed to the chair at the head of the room, the seat he usually occupied himself. I sat down, feeling everyone's eyes on me. It felt strange to be the center of attention in a family that usually barely noticed my existence. "So," I began, "what did you want to talk about?" Hubert and Enid exchanged glances as if deciding who would begin. At last, Hubert coughed. "Dad, I got a call from Louise Bennett this morning." I didn't remember the name right away. "Thorin Elmsley's secretary," Hubert explained. She said you'd recently made a new will." "Oh, that's it." The leak had come from the lawyer's office. I made a mental note to tell Thorin about it. He wouldn't be happy to hear that his employee was divulging confidential information. "And so what?" I asked calmly. Hubert looked stunned by my nonchalant tone. "So what? Dad, you made a new will and didn't tell us about it." "Should I have?" I raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it my own business?" "Of course it is, but—" Hubert hesitated. "We're family. Decisions like this are usually discussed." "How did we discuss selling my house?" I asked. "Or transferring money for the boys' education? Or my moving into the guest house?" Hubert blushed. "Those are different. We were acting in your interest then." "And now I'm acting in my own," I countered. "What's so shocking about that?" Enid decided to intervene, seeing that the conversation was not going according to plan. "Abbott, it's not about the will. It's the fact that we're told that you excluded Hubert." Your only son. I looked at her. And who told you that? Louise Bennett. I wondered how she knew the details of my will. She didn't say so, Hubert admitted. But she hinted that you'd met with the community college and discussed setting up some kind of foundation. Is that true? Enid asked. Are you going to leave all your money to the college instead of your own family? I noticed she was talking about all the money, even though she'd pretended before that I was practically a pauper. What kind of money? I asked innocently. You always said that I was dependent on you, that I barely had enough for my medicine. Hubert and Enid looked at each other again. It was obvious that they didn't know how aware I was of my financial situation. Dad, Hubert decided to change tactics. We know you have savings, and that's great. You've earned a comfortable old age. We're just surprised you decided not to leave it to your family. Why should I? I asked bluntly. Over the past few years, you've treated me like a burden, like an unwelcome guest in your home. You yourself said recently that I should stop living off you and get a job. Why are you so interested in my savings now? My words hit the mark. Hubert looked as if I'd punched him in the face. I wasn't myself when I said those things, he muttered. I didn't mean it. What did you mean? I insisted. Because it seemed to me that you were very clear. Enid tried to salvage the situation. Abbott, all families fight sometimes. They say things they don't mean. But at the end of the day, we're still a family. Blood doesn't become water because of one fight. It's not about one fight, I objected. It's about years of neglect, the way you treated me after Martha died, the way you made me feel like an extra in your perfect life. There was a heavy silence. Even the boys, who usually showed no interest in family conversations, looked ashamed. We didn't realize you felt this way, Hubert said at last. But we can fix it, Dad. Give us a chance. I looked at my son, a successful, confident man who now looked lost and vulnerable. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to believe he was truly remorseful. But the other part remembered all the humiliation, all the cold stares, all the dismissive comments over the years. I'm moving out, I said calmly. I found a room near Garth's workshop where I'll be working as a consultant. What? Hubert looked stunned. You can't leave. This is your home. No, Hubert, this is your home. My house was on Elm Street, but we sold it, remember? We can buy you a new house, Hubert exclaimed. Or we could remodel the guest room on the first floor. A private bathroom, a small kitchen, whatever you want. I shook my head. It's not about convenience. It's about respect. It's about feeling needed, not a burden. But we need you, Enid exclaimed with sudden emotion. The boys need a grandfather. Hubert needs a father. Don't they? I looked at the grandchildren, who looked as if they would rather be anywhere but here. I hadn't noticed much need for me in recent years. Hubert knelt down next to my chair, a gesture that might otherwise have been touching. Dad, please, I know we haven't been the perfect family, but we can change. I can change. Just give me a chance. I looked at him, trying to see the sincerity in his eyes, but all I saw was fear. Fear of losing an inheritance that he now knew was significant. After a week of phone calls, surprise visits, and clumsy attempts to bribe me with attention, I moved into the room I'd rented from Mrs. Flynn. Hubert tried to talk me out of it until the last-minute first offering to renovate the guest house, then insisting I move into the main house, and when he realized I wasn't going to change my mind, offering to buy me a separate apartment closer to their house. I remained adamant. Monday morning, I packed the last of my belongings into the old suitcase Martha and I had bought for our wedding trip, hailed a cab, and left while Hubert was at work. I left a note on the kitchen table. Thanks for your hospitality. I'll call you when I'm settled. Dad. Mrs. Flynn's room was even cozier than I remembered. It was small but bright, with a window overlooking the harbor, where fishing boats and yachts bobbed on the waves. I unpacked, hung Martha's portrait on the wall, and felt strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I was master of my own destiny. Not a burden, not an unwanted relative, but a man who made his own decisions. Working in Garth's shop brought not only additional income, but also satisfaction. Young mechanics quickly recognized my experience and often sought my advice. Customers, especially older boat owners, preferred to discuss engine problems with me rather than with those young guys who only know how to hook up computers. Garth joked that I had become his secret weapon. Hubert called every day, sometimes several times. At first his calls were filled with reproaches and accusations. How could I leave without saying goodbye? How could I leave them? Why didn't I trust them enough to choose to live with a strange woman? I answered calmly, repeating that I needed space and time to sort myself out. Gradually, the tone of his calls changed from accusations to pleas. He begged me to come back, promised that things would be different, that they would treat me with the respect I deserved. 2 weeks after I moved in, Hubert showed up at Garth's workshop. I was just finishing counseling a client about a strange knocking noise in the engine of his boat when I saw my son standing in the entrance. He wasn't wearing his usual business suit, but jeans and a sweater, an outfit I hadn't seen him wear in years. "Dad," he said, coming toward me, "can I talk to you? Alone?" I nodded and led him into a small office at the back of the workshop. When Garth saw us, he raised an eyebrow meaningfully but said nothing. "How are you?" Hubert asked when we sat down. "Is Mrs. Flynn treating you well? Have you got everything you need?" "I'm fine," I answered. "Mrs. Flynn is a wonderful hostess, and the room is even better than I expected." Hubert nodded, but I could tell by the look on his face that it wasn't my living arrangements that bothered him. "Papa, I came to apologize. A real apology." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I've been acting awful," he continued. "Not just lately, but, for years. I took you for granted. I've treated you like a burden when I should have cherished every moment with you, and I am so ashamed." There was a sincerity in his voice that I hadn't heard in a long time, or maybe I just wanted to hear it. "Why are you only realizing this now?" I asked. "After you found out about my will?" Hubert lowered his eyes. "I deserved it. But I swear it's not just about the money. You're leaving. It made me realize that I could lose you for good, and that scared me more than losing any inheritance." I looked at my son, trying to see the truth behind his words. He looked genuinely upset, even devastated. Perhaps there was some truth in his remorse. "What do you want from me, Hubert?" I asked bluntly. "I want you to give us a chance," he answered. "Me, Enid, the boys. A chance to prove that we can be a real family, that we can treat you with the respect you deserve." "And how do you propose to do that?" "Any way we can," he said. "You name the terms and I'll fulfill them. Anything." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to forgive him unconditionally. After all, he was still my son, my flesh and blood. But the other part remembered all the humiliation, all the cold stares, all the neglect over the years. And that part knew that unconditional forgiveness would only lead to repeating the same mistakes. "I have conditions," I said at last. 3 conditions. If you really want to repair our relationship, you must accept them. Hubert straightened as if preparing to strike. "I'm listening." "First, respect," I began. "Not just in words, but in deeds. No talking behind my back, no decisions about my life without my input, no attempts to control me or my finances." Hubert nodded. "Of course. It's the least I can do." "Second," I continued, "weekly family dinners. All together, at the same table, no phones or tablets. We'll talk to each other like a real family." "I agree," Hubert said. "It's a great idea. We can start tomorrow." "And thirdly," I paused, "you'll volunteer at the nursing home, 1 day a week, at least 4 hours." Hubert blinked. "A nursing home? But why?" So you can see what it's like to be old and alone, I answered. So you can see how the elderly are treated when they're considered a burden. And maybe so you can learn to appreciate what you have, a family that is still there for you in spite of everything. Hubert looked stunned. But Dad, I have a job, I have obligations. I can't just pick up and— Those are my terms, I interrupted him. Whether you accept them or not is up to you. There was a long pause. I could see Hubert's mind struggling between his selfishness and his desire to reconnect with me. Finally, he took a deep breath. Okay, I'll agree. On all three conditions. Are you sure? I asked. Because if you agree and then don't fulfill your promise, that's the end of it, Hubert. I won't give you a third chance. I'm sure, he said firmly. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I promise. I held out my hand to him. Then it's a deal. He shook my hand and I saw tears in his eyes. Thank you, Dad. You won't regret it. I hoped I would. The following week showed that Hubert was really serious about his promises. He organized the first family dinner at his home. Not a lavish reception to show off status, but a simple, home-cooked meal. Enid cooked a roast from Martha's recipe— I was surprised she knew it— and the boys helped set the table. All the phones were stacked in a basket at the entrance to the dining room, and for the first time in a long time, we actually talked to each other. Orson talked about his physics project, Pharaoh about a new friend they were playing basketball with. Enid shared ideas for reorganizing her charity committee, and Hubert, to my surprise, admitted that he was thinking about changing jobs. I'm sick of selling insurance, he said. 20 years of the same thing. I feel stuck. What would you like to do? I asked. Hubert shrugged. I don't know. Maybe start my own business. Something to do with boats or the sea? I've always loved the water like you. It was the first time in years that he had mentioned our shared love of the sea. Once upon a time, we often went out into the bay in a small boat I had built with my own hands. Hubert was just a boy, but even then he had shown an interest in maritime endeavors. Then came adolescence, college, career, and all those hobbies were forgotten for the sake of serious work. It's never too late to start over, I said. Believe me, I know. Hubert smiled. Yeah, you're right. You've always been right about a lot of things, Dad. I wish I had listened to you sooner. After dinner, Hubert and I sat on the veranda looking at the stars and sipping whiskey, a good whiskey that I had picked out myself at the store. He told me about his first day at the nursing home. He went there expecting to see a dreary, depressing place, but instead found a community of people who, despite their age and limitations, continued to live life to the fullest. There's an old man there, Walter. He's 92 years old, Hubert said. He's a former civil engineer. When I told him we were planning an addition to the house, he immediately started giving advice, drawing diagrams. His hands are shaky, but his mind is sharper than many young people. And what did you do there? I asked. Mostly talking to them, Hubert answered. They're so happy for any attention. Some relatives visit regularly, but many visit only rarely or not at all. And you know what the weirdest thing is? They don't complain. They tell stories, make jokes, share wisdom. Yeah, I didn't see that coming. Age doesn't make people less human, I said. It's just something society often forgets. Hubert nodded. I'm beginning to realize that. I'm beginning to understand what it's been like for you all these years. Gradually, our relationship began to mend. Not all at once, not without difficulties, but step by step. Family dinners became a tradition that everyone looked forward to. Hubert never missed a day of volunteering, even when he had important meetings at work. Sometimes he took the boys with him, and I saw how it changed their attitudes not only toward me, but toward other seniors as well. Enid had changed too. She stopped treating me as an inconvenient addition to the family and started asking my opinion about raising the boys, about home renovations, even about her charity projects. One day she confessed that she had always been a little afraid of me. "You were so unyielding," she said. "So sure of your principles. I always felt I didn't live up to your standards. And I thought you thought I was an uneducated old man who didn't fit into your perfect home," I replied. We both laughed, realizing how many years we had spent making wrong assumptions about each other. 6 months had passed. I was still living in Mrs. Flynn's room and working in Garth's workshop, but now I was often at Hubert's house not as a dependent relative, but as a respected member of the family. The boys began to visit me after school, especially Orson, who suddenly discovered an interest in mechanics and often asked me to explain how engines worked. Hubert kept his word about finding a new career. He quit the insurance company and invested some of his savings in a small boat rental company. Things weren't going brilliantly, but he liked the new job much better than the old one. "For the first time in years, I'm looking forward to Monday," he told me one day. On a rainy evening in early fall, we were sitting in his office. The boys were already asleep. Enid was at a meeting of her charity committee. We were drinking whiskey and discussing problems with one of the engines in his fleet of boats. "Dad," Hubert said suddenly, setting his glass aside, "I've been meaning to ask you something." "What?" I asked, noticing the seriousness in his tone. "About your will," he said. Did you change it?" I shook my head. "No, Hubert. It remains the same." He nodded, accepting the information. "I see. I respect your decision, whatever it is." "You do?" I raised an eyebrow. "I do," he said. "These last few months, they've taught me a lot. I've learned that a relationship with you is more important than any money. And if you've decided to leave your fortune for scholarships for working-class kids, well, that's a worthy goal." I watched him carefully, trying to see the ulterior motives behind his words. But for the first time in a long time, all I saw in his eyes was sincerity. "I'm proud of you, son," I said quietly. "You've changed." "Because of you," he replied. "You could have just cut me out of your life after everything I'd done, but you gave me a chance to be a better man, to be the son you deserve." At this point, I was almost ready to tell him that I had already made changes to my will, not completely canceling the scholarship fund, but reducing its size and adding a share for Hubert, not because of his efforts at reconciliation, but because I saw a real change in his character. But something held me back. Maybe an old habit of caution, or the wisdom that comes with age that says some insurances are better kept. "Do you know what the most important thing I've learned in these 6 months?" Hubert asked. "What?" "That money is just a tool," he said. "It doesn't make you happy on its own. It's how you use it and for whom. I've spent my whole life chasing success, chasing status, chasing the right house in the right neighborhood. And in the process, I'd forgotten what was really important: my family, the people I loved." I nodded silently, surprised by the depth of his insight. "And you know what else?" he continued. "I realized why you loved your job at the shipyard so much. Not because of the money. There wasn't much of it. It was the feeling that you were doing something real, something that mattered. I never experienced that at the insurance company. But now, with the boats, it feels different." "I'm glad you found your calling," I said, "even if it took 44 years. We both laughed, and the conversation moved on to other topics. But that evening remains in my memory as the moment I realized that our reconciliation was real, not because of the money, not because of the will, but because we both finally saw each other not just as roles, father, son, but as people with their own strengths and weaknesses, their own mistakes and accomplishments. The next morning, I called Torrin Elmsley and asked him to prepare a new version of the will. I wasn't going to completely abandon the idea of a scholarship fund. It still seemed right and worthy. But now, I wanted to include my family in the will, not as recipients of an unconditional gift, but as partners in creating a legacy we could all be proud of. When I finished my conversation with Torin, I felt a strange peacefulness. Life had come full circle. I had once given everything I had to my son without hesitation or demanding anything in return, simply because I loved him. Then, when that love was rejected, I decided to protect myself the only way I had left, through a will. And now that our relationship was rekindled, I could again give him some of what I had, not blindly, but with the wisdom that comes only with experience. Martha would be pleased, I thought, looking at her portrait. She had always said that true love should be both unconditional and practical at the same time. To love with all one's heart, but not to lose one's head. Forgive, but don't forget the lessons. To give, but also be able to set boundaries. I looked out the window at the harbor, where boats bobbed in the morning light. Among them was Hubert's little yacht with the proud name New Beginnings on board. Symbolic, I thought. It was indeed a new beginning for both of us. Not perfect, not without compromise, but real, and perhaps more solid than what had gone before, because now it was built not on illusions and expectations, but on understanding and mutual respect. Old age, I decided, was not so bad if you came to it with wisdom, and a family, with all its complexities and contradictions, is still a family. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us all of that. Sometimes it takes almost losing something to truly begin to appreciate it. I called Garth to tell him I was going to be a little late for work. Hubert had invited me for a test sail on his new boat, and I couldn't refuse. After all, the sea had always been our shared passion, and maybe on the water, away from the hustle and bustle and distractions, we could continue to build that bridge of understanding we had begun to build 6 months ago. Life went on. Not perfect, not without problems and challenges, but definitely worth living, especially if there are people around who, despite all their faults, are still trying to be better. What more can a father ask of his children? And what else can he offer them but his love? A love that is wise enough to include forgiveness, expectations, and sometimes a little practical motivation.